Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that will not send you cassette tapes about the end of the world. I'm Brenda Simmons.
I mean, it was kind of like early podcasting. I'm Mike Altman. We are two religious studies professors trying to understand all of these cult documentaries that you can't stop binge watching.
Did you trade cassette tapes? Like, was that a thing? Was that a mode of currency, informational currency for you?
I think it was definitely more CDs. Burnt CDs,
Okay,
burning
yeah.
CDs.
I was right on the cusp. I had cassettes that then also could.
Yeah, I had cassettes when I remember I had cassettes of stuff I had taped off the radio.
Yeah.
That was a big thing.
For
I would
sure.
get I remember my little gray Maxell cassette tapes. I would tape stuff off the radio. And I actually found this weekend a bunch of my big books of CDs full of like burned CDs from friends and things.
Sure.
So
that's a treasure.
Yeah.
Well, the person that we're talking about the cult behind the killer, the Andrea Yates story on HBO Max just came out, but the person in question that the documentary focuses on is Michael Warnicki, who distributed a lot of his religious teachings by way of cassettes.
Yeah.
So.
More on that in a moment. If you want to support the show and help her go find us, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Cult Favorite Pod. Subscribe to the show on Apple or Spotify or both.
Anywhere, really.
And then just the views that we express on the show are our own as experts and researchers in religious studies. Do not represent the University of Alabama.
Content warning.
Yes.
Because we were talking about Andrea Yates, if you don't know who she is, this story deals with child abuse and suicidal ideation. And so, take care while listening. What did you know about Andrea Yates? Had you ever come across that name? Do you remember her?
No, I didn't remember. I vaguely remembered this. Mm-hmm. But also, I feel like there was a number of stories like this around this time-ish, I guess. Like, I remember the story of, wasn't there a woman who, drove her kids into a lake or something? I don't remember. But, so, yeah, it was vaguely I've heard of stories
swimming
like this.
in your cultural consciousness, but
if you had said who's Andrea Yates, I'd be like, I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Where you were?
I was high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was in
college.
college.
This was spring of 2001.
Okay.
So I was finishing.
Gotcha.
11th grade.
Okay. I was in college, and I remember this very, very vividly. It dominated news coverage at the time. This was summer 2001. And the nutshell is that Andrea Yates was a young mother who drowned her 5 children. Just a few months later would be the attacks on 9/11. And so news stories always have a short attention span, but obviously everything went upside down and just the world changed in terms of the ways that we told stories about what. So, but I do remember it very well. And I'm interested in why. I couldn't find much to do with why it is that right now we're telling this story again, because this
I have theories.
Ooh, good. I want to hear your theories, because this is a brand new documentary, like we said, out of HBO Max. And here's what gets covered. 3-part investigation discovery series. It covers the religious context of Andrea Yates. She was a Houston mother of 5. Her children were Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary. We won't go into them specifically in depth, but I think it's important and useful to say their names. They were from 7 years to 6 months, respectively. Mary was her youngest, and she drowned them in June of 2001. The documentary itself focuses, though, specifically on the belief system of the Yates family and what they subscribe to. Its main proponent was Michael Warnicki. He was an evangelical street preacher who did a lot of fire and brimstone preaching, and that theology emphasized human sin, personal failings, lots of like signage of you're going to hell, like on college campuses and stuff. So what doesn't get covered, like Michael and his wife, Rachel Warnicki, did not respond to requests for comment or participation. So we don't hear from them directly. We do get clips of them speaking directly in like news interviews and stuff, but we don't get a sense of how widespread his reach is. Like, he's still around doing his thing. But at the time, especially, like, what was his impact 20 years ago and 25 years ago? Not sure. We only hear from a couple of former followers, specifically and most importantly, Moses Storm, who is also his nephew, and David De La Isla, who was a follower for some time.
Yeah.
So
there's a part in the third episode where we hear for a few other people briefly, and one of them who had set up a website about this says that he had he says hundreds of views and then 60 people that reached out to him.
Okay.
Which is not a lot.
It's not a ton.
So,
but yeah, that's one thing that doesn't get covered. The other thing that we do not hear much about, which we will talk about at length to follow, is Andrea's specific. Like, we do hear about depression and postpartum psychosis. However, we don't get a lot of context for that, because if you look into it just a tiny little bit, her history of depression like dates back to her teens. And she talked to a friend about suicidal ideation way back when. She had attempted suicide a couple of times when, around the time that she ends up killing her children. And we don't hear about that too much. We don't hear about the fact that her father died in March 2001. She took a turn after that. Yeah, like her last child was born in I think it's November 2000. Her father passes that spring, and then the kids die that summer. So this is a really, the timeline I think is important to keep in mind. We do hear a great deal from her husband, Rusty, who we'll talk about as well. But we don't, he talks about he wishes that he knew the extent to things. But we don't get a lot on what is his take on depression and how it works, because he is, he was an evangelical Christian who actually introduced Andrea to Michael Warnicki's teachings. He was the on-ramp to that. But her brother, Andrea's brother, would go on in interviews to say that Rusty was kind of dismissive about Andrea's depression as a clinical diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that he, the doctors, she was hospitalized, doctors would say, do not leave her unsupervised. But Rusty kind of felt well, she needs to get more independent, and so I'll just leave her for short amounts of time, that kind of thing. So these are little breadcrumbs that you can find and follow outside of the documentary, but that's not something that we hear about. Yates herself, Andrea would say to a prison psychiatrist later, that she told Rusty before they had Mary, their youngest, I don't want to have sex because the doctors told me I might hurt the kids. In her rendering, he assured her that she was a good mom and she could handle it. And because part of their religious beliefs was about procreation and just kind of allowing. Which
he kept very close to the chest in the interviews on the documentary.
So he
he was very measured at a lot of moments if you I'd be curious what other people think,
right?
Who watch this, because if it's I could see what I felt was because I'm aware of this worldview and all of this. I can see what's probably behind the thing. I know the thing, and I could see the things that he knows he doesn't want to say on camera that are probably behind this. And the number of times when he just sort of kind of holds his hands up and metaphorically, and it's like, I don't know. And it's like, what were you? Like, who are you?
Don't know. In as much as, we're going to keep our focus as ever on context rather than like adjudicating personal behavior or belief. But and he would complicate all of this, of course, like in court documents and stuff as well. He has some critiques of some of her doctors and we hear like little glimmers of issues like their insurance like only allowed for this long of a stay in the hospital. And so they had to release her. Was she ready to be released? Probably not. So we'll talk about that context. But those are things that do not get a lot of coverage in the documentary. What does happen is that we get from Rusty a sense of like, they're married in the mid-90s. They had 5 kids in 6 years. Yeah. Okay? So just pin in that to pull out later. Like I said, we hear from former members, most predominantly David de la Isla and Moses Storm. Storm is Warnke's nephew. I think it's his mother is Michael's sister, right?
Yes.
And so, he gives a story about like, what it was like to grow up in that kind of family, because he also had a lot of brothers and sisters, just like in the Yates family. And so he kind of provides this parallel apparatus of what it was like to grow up in that kind of setting. From those two, from David and Moses, we learn who Warnke was. Moses, I think, is actually one of like the executive producers or something on this documentary.
Yeah.
Is it executive? I don't know what the role is, but he is a production like person he's part of why this got made. And he's a comedian who has like done some things. I have not followed those breadcrumbs, but he has suggested though that the stories that we tend to tell about Andrea Yates and the way that she gets depicted in the media do not shine a light on Michael Warnke and this set of religious teachings that, were very much to do with like fear and the end of the world and personal sin. So the appeal of Warnke, I guess, according to at least David de la Isla, who was not born into this and who like came to be compelled, was that like Warnke seemed kind of edgy because he was condemning other Christians and other pastors, and he would make cassette tapes and send them out, some videos. He wrote letters, but it was a very like analog means of disseminating this message. He never said, though, that, like, I am a prophet or anything that we know of. It was just like, I'm an ambassador for Christ or I'm spreading this message. The way, though, that he, according to David and Moses, kind of exerted a sort of control that then they would come to call cult-like is that he was sort of the arbiter of other people's sin. There was this emphasis on the end of the world and the day of judgment, lots of fear, and that not only is, the Christian church in a kind of peril, but like straight up the rest of the world is satanic. Like, so you better homeschool your kids and you better like watch who your friends are, et cetera, because like the world is in the stronghold of Satan, and you are also like under, you're in Satan's grasp, and you have to make sure that you're going to heaven. So
and there's like no assurance of going, like there's never a sense that you're actually saved in his sort of worldview.
Right. There's no like talk about what, like grace or mercy or forgiveness or anything like that. Importantly, children reach an age of accountability, which is age 12. This is not an uncommon teaching.
The age is different, but yeah.
So age of accountability is 12.
Yeah.
Until then, they are safe if they die.
Yes.
God will have them in his protection until they reach the age of accountability. That's going to be important. Also, important to this theology is that women are like legit witches and are part of a it's to do with like the theology about the Edenic fall. Eve messed things up. The way that they can, if not redeem themselves, at least keep themselves safe, is submitting to their husbands. Moses talks about like his mom took this to heart and like got a bus and they traveled around and like the kids would do their own street preaching and stuff. And so you have to raise the children. Like there's a lot of onus on the mother who is this den of iniquity and witchcraft. Mm-hmm. She needs to submit to the husband, and she also is very responsible for her children's salvation.
Yeah.
But that's complicated because if you are, in fact, a stronghold of Satan and you're responsible for your children, you're in a really like precarious position.
Yes. And when we've seen this already in a lot, like we saw this with Ruby Frank, we saw this with Gwen Shamblin. Mm-hmm. There we go, I'm blanking. So like this whole thing is not, I think it's like
this whole thing. You mean like just women being responsible for the salvation of others?
The patriarchy, misogyny of it all is baked in. This is kind of a theological tenet.
Feature, not a bug.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's baked into a whole wing of American Christianity.
Yes. So have as many children as possible. Do not let them into the world, though. Keep them very much like directly removed from the world, and make sure that you are keeping yourself holy. But that's going to be really complicated because what Warnke emphasized, according to his followers, is very much about your sin. And so
you're never actually...
you're never going to be good enough.
Even with those other examples, or even with something like the IBLP, where you have this sort of insider outsider of like the world and the Christians, the world and the church, even in Jesus camp, like all these examples of like conservative Christianity we've seen, there's still a way to be in. Mm-hmm. Whereas Warnke's whole thing, it was like insiders and outsiders, but there was never ever any insiders. Mm-hmm. Like they talk about like it might like 8 people, which was basically his family was one. It was something that was like, it was like almost like an aspiration, like aspirational, or it was kind of impossible to fulfill the requirement in a way that sets it apart, I think, from other things we've looked at.
And even it's interesting because like even in the phrase like conservative Christianity, like these we get very much a sense of like a conservative theology, but even in terms of political affiliation, there's nothing about that we get access to or hear about because, at least from what I gather, which of course is limited because it's just in this documentary, it's all bad. Just the world is bad. Yeah. The world is satanic. And so there isn't even a sense of like political identification or affiliation where people can find a sense of a collective that they can plug into and get their beliefs reinforced by. Right. There's just isolation, which again we'll get into more. But okay, so we hear about Andrea's. I'm pulling out the pen from the red flag of 5 children in 6 years. We hear about Andrea's postpartum psychosis and hospitalization. In 1999, her son Luke is born. She wrote at that point to Rachel Warnke, Michael's wife, saying that, like, I've had this baby. And Rachel, we see a part of a letter that reiterates her husband's piece, Perilous Times. Like he's writing all of these tracts and mailing them out. It talks about unrighteous mothers and how unrighteous mothers produce unrighteous children who, like, legit will burn in a literal hell unless they died. And again, if you die before you're 12, then you're safe.
Right.
But so she had taken a turn. Andrea's mental health had taken a turn. Rusty, her husband, finds her like standing catatonic with a knife at her throat. She's diagnosed with postpartum depression. They give her like antipsychotic meds. She improves immediately, but she stops taking them. And while she's pregnant with Mary, she stops taking these meds. In November 2000, like I said, Mary is born. She was discharged from, she conceives Mary like 7 weeks after she's discharged from the hospital. The doctors tell her in that moment, like, we're discharging you. We can't keep you. Your insurance has run out. Do not have any more children.
Yeah.
Like categorically do not have more children. That is not
how Rusty frames it in the documentary, however.
Correct. And again, I want to, be careful about what like we propagate as fact, because there's a lot of back and forth and contention over, who knew what when, like what did the doctors give, what knowledge did he have access to? He would say not as much as I should have had. Doctors would say something a little different, so there is back and forth there. But in
the documentary, though, he says that he was told it's a 50-50 chance that she would relapse.
Right.
And his thought was, well, we'll just give her more get the medicines again and do this again.
Right.
And then later, and I don't know how this was this an editing trick, but he makes the reference that the risk was the same as the flu.
Yeah, there was something about the flu.
Which I was weird.
Yeah.
And
she would just get sick, but she would get better.
Right. I guess that's what he was thinking. Like, and what goes and this is one of those examples of where I feel like he's keeping his theological cards close to the chest is like the idea that it is worth a 50-50 shot to have another kid. Like that, the math that goes into weighing that.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense if we don't have a better picture of what does actual child rearing and childbearing mean in your world and your theological context, which he won't tell us. He just kind of says we have traditional. The word traditional does a lot of work. A lot of
heavy lifting. What we do get access to from him is that he very much understood depression and he doesn't use the word psychosis. Like postpartum psychosis is a specific thing, clinically speaking, but he presented that as very much like his understanding was that was something that affected her, but that wouldn't necessarily affect the children.
Right.
That he didn't see their safety as being in peril, that she might have gotten sick, but that we can handle that because there are diagnoses, there are meds she can take, etc. So
that's a more charitable reading than mine.
Yeah,
mine is that like that the I don't know. There might not be. I don't want
to presume what anyone thought. Because that's not the point.
I do, but I
know you do. And that's fair. That's totally fair. In terms of what kind of story we're telling and where this turns into cult rhetoric, becomes interesting in light of, though, the very thing that you're talking about, which is this sort of like resistance to any kind of external authority that would have advice about childbearing.
And I guess the value of having a child and the value of the child over the mother.
Yes.
In the sense that it's worth the risk to have another. Like he would not say it was worth the risk to have another child because we're supposed to and children are a blessing and we were instructed by God to do it.
Yes.
And so if anything, but what that like the theology that says that the well-being of the child is more important.
Yeah.
And the existence of the child and the birth of a child is more important than the well-being of the mother.
Sure.
That's the kind of unspoken value that I think is one of the missing links to understanding what's going on.
That's true. And I would just add that very idea that the life of the child is more important than the mother's, et cetera, exists also in lots of domains,
100%.
not
No,
simply
I don't
theologically.
think it's that. No, 100%.
So, okay. So after she has Mary, her mental state starts deteriorating rapidly. And again, her father dies in the mix of all of this. We don't hear much about that. We get a tiny little snippet of an interview that her mother and brother were giving, I think to Larry King or something.
Yeah.
And, they had some blame to lay at the feet of Michael Warnicki.
Yeah.
But that's not something that they don't get interviewed for this documentary. I don't know what their situation is, but her mental state deteriorates rapidly. She starts hallucinating and actively believing that the devil is inside of her. Another letter from Rachel Warnicki more or less affirms this, and this is what we get from the documentary. It says, "I pray for you, Andrea, for you, Rusty, and your family. I know things are not the way you would like them to be. I've seen many women just continually put off their salvation in Jesus. Jesus knows how weak you are, how weak and vulnerable. I know you're frustrated, Andrea." And we don't get, pause there, we don't get any sense of what she's actually referring to. Because again, like you were saying earlier, why would she have thought that she wasn't, saved? What weaknesses and vulnerabilities was she alluding to that are being referred to here? We don't know. But she goes on to say, you are accountable for these children. You can change them. There will be a day it's too late. Don't look to Rusty, look to Jesus. If you allow Satan to come in and still be understanding, the consequences will be tragic. There is evidence that Andrea was listening to the Warnicki tapes on the morning of the children's deaths. But we don't, we can't know that either. Yeah. I think that they were just in the tape deck. But so she goes to trial in 2002. She's charged initially with 5 counts of capital murder. And, the defense, of course, pleads insanity. As soon as the kids die, she calls the police and says, "I've killed my children. Yeah. Here's where I am." So defense pleads insanity. She thought that killing her children was the only way to save them from hell, she would say. But in that first trial, she's convicted and sentenced to life, but she'll get retried, a few years later when it becomes clear that an expert witness gave false testimony. He had invoked a Law and Order episode that didn't exist. It was, a mother who kills her children and then pleads insanity and gets off was the
episode. The episode never happened.
Never happened. So... So she was retried in 2006, found not guilty by reason of insanity, sent to a maximum security psychiatric hospital there in Houston, or in Texas. I think it's in Houston. But the Warnicki teachings come up in the trial, but no charges are ever brought against him. Again, he's still out and about doing his thing.
They become the explanation for why, in a more fuller way. And I think her defense attorney, he uses the phrase faith-based delusions. And he called it faith-based, whatever the thing, that was his adjective. But yeah, I think in that case, it was we need to walk people through all of this. Right. Which I'd be curious to hear more from him about what they were thinking about her religious beliefs in the first trial versus the second trial.
And in the... and we start getting the little clips from the media and headlines, people reading. People were very quick, perhaps predictably, to weigh in on what kind of monster would do this kind of thing. It was a reminder that before there were Facebook comments on articles, there was just people writing to the editor. It's still getting printed. A police chief had never cried until he saw this scene, that kind of thing. And it was straight up horrific. But the response in the and so I guess this is, as ever, what I find interesting about these stories is what kinds of stories we tell and how we tell them when we are confronted with this kind of tragedy.
Yeah.
When there is loss of life, when there is harm or violence done, how do we make sense?
Yeah.
And one of the ways that we make sense is with cult rhetoric.
Yeah.
Another way we make sense is, at least in the media at the time, very much the story that was being told about Andrea Yates was just, it doesn't matter what kind of situation you're in, you don't do this. Like this was the, kind of Rubicon crossed into a space of just unconscionable human behavior. So, this is part of why then folks like Moses wants to put this in a bigger religious context, which is, that makes sense. That's understandable. That's context that we don't get a lot from the media, but it comes, like you said, it comes up in the trial, but it doesn't get put in any sort of context that would see Warnke being charged with anything.
Right.
And so we have this documentary. We hear from Ashlyn Hilliard, who I forget what the title is that is given to her in the documentary. It's like cult
interventionist or cult intervention specialist.
Cult intervention specialist. If you go down that rabbit hole,
yep.
Hilliard is the founder of a organization called People Leave Cults, and they've got merch. There's a site,
we need
Cult Intervention and Recovery. I'm just gonna put. This is, I guess, where
also,
I'm gonna.
What is the cult? The cult studies. What's it called? There's an association. It's kind of the more psychology side of cult studies that she was a part of too. I can't remember the name of it now.
Well, this is okay. So we want to put this. So this this horrible thing happens. How can we possibly make sense of it? We want to hold people accountable. We want to have justice for these innocent children. We want to make meaning out of something that, I guess, it just seems unconscionable. So enter media narratives in the early aughts, enter interviews after the fact, enter this documentary 24 years later. What gets brought to bear in this rendering is this cult speak.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It just what becomes the interesting question for the people being interviewed is, as we have seen in so many of the examples that we've touched on, like, is this or is this not a cult? And here are the ways in which it is the cult, and here's how this person was like leading a cult and how he was like exhibiting cult leader behavior.
Right.
And, as ever, I don't find that kind of yes or no question very useful, but I understand why to the people like Moses Storm who are raised in that setting, it is helpful to put a kind of apparatus of language around what he, grew up in. He talks about the like feeling and very like emotionally fraught. Like it's he has all of these feelings around understanding and giving empathy to Andrea Yates, which of course I find empathy always really useful. And I found his kind of quest for trying to make meaning of this and trying to give more religious context to folks. I found that really useful. There's this awkward postscript of the documentary at the very end where he has kind of a sit down with Rusty, because Rusty's take on the religious element of all of this, of like, was this a cult? So it's not until, well into the series, and there are only 3 episodes, but it's well in when we start getting this cult speak where they, we hear from this cult intervention specialist and so on. The criteria of cult do not get presented in the way that they do in other documentaries of like, let's go down the checklist. Does this fit? It's about like coercive behavior and fear and control tactics, etc.
Yeah.
Fine. Rusty's response to that though, of like, was this a cult? He's like, I mean, I don't know. He is not willing to go to that place in the same kind of way that David and Moses are. So Moses wants to sit down with Rusty and just kind of like, I guess, put it to him more directly or something, or at least tell his side of like, I grew up in a family like yours, and here's what that was like. That
I thought he was going to be a lot harder on him. Like, I thought that was when they were like, Moses wanted to speak with Rusty. After production, Moses wanted to speak with Rusty. I thought, because he's in the credits, so I was like, maybe he saw the interviews and saw Rusty hemming and hawing about, is this a cult or not? And he's going to like push him a little bit. But I don't think what actually happens kind of takes one step that direction and then quickly pivots, like you're saying,
Would that have felt useful to you though? Like, I mean, why did you want him to do that?
I didn't want him to.
What would the...
I wanted somebody to get more out of Rusty in the interview. Maybe that wasn't possible. I just wanted more information. Again, because I want to understand why people are doing what they're doing. And I don't feel like I understood what he was doing. I get more on that in a second. But, So I thought that, Moses's sense of this is a cult and it has destroyed people, including me, would be the way that conversation went. And he quickly, I think, and I think partly because I don't know that he was in the right emotional space to be that hard on Rusty himself. But then it kind of pivoted to this sort of almost like we were both gone through this together thing. And I don't get, like, we hear from a number of people. Well, we hear from maybe like two extras in episode 3 briefly, but we hear from Moses and David about when they encountered Warnke in college and where they were, and and we hear from and then Moses sort of grew up in it. We don't hear much from Rusty about what he made of Warnke, why he would be so interested in this guy that he would like. It was sort of like, I introduced it to her, and if she wanted to, like, and that's where I'm just like, that I don't.
He actually says, I was raised in a faith tradition that emphasized God's love and grace, and so I didn't really take it, and it didn't land for me in the same way that it landed for you. And I mean, I appreciate about, like, it seemed like the priority for Moses was like putting this religious teaching context into the story that we tend to tell about Andrea Yates. He wasn't, beating the drum of like holding accountable his mom or Rusty Yates or like I appreciate that, because like what I mean, go on your journey, whatever. But like in terms of, this is a documentary telling a story. I don't know. It was a, but for better or worse, he has that conversation with Rusty. And Rusty, his response is, I can see, like, he doesn't double down on, I'm not going to call this a cult. Right. And he's like, I see where you're coming from. I get it. And, you know.
I guess I feel like if you grew up say you grew up in a Christian tradition that was all about grace and love, and your wife and who you've had 5 is like deeply into this guy talking about hell all the time, I might have at least been like, hey, this might not be good for you. And it never appears that he said that. Right? Like,
well, there was just no, like, there was no broader communal structure of accountability and support. like a church or like a, you know, extended family that we hear of or anything like that.
Right.
It is just like there's this family and there's individual accountability in relation to sin that you can never quite get away from. You need to submit to your husband, but you need to ultimately be turning to Christ. And it's just all happening kind of in a vacuum. And so, you know, what was Rusty supposed to say? That's, I mean, I have thoughts, but that's none of my business. I just know that he was saying or not saying things in a vacuum.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I just don't think we're getting his full, I don't think we got his full thoughts on Warnke and everything like in the documentary.
Of course.
And that's frustrating.
But have we ever gotten when have you felt fully satisfied by someone's full thoughts about anything in a documentary? Like where did you think that kind of did a good job? I wonder.
I mean, I feel like most of this documentary, like this is what was interesting with the documentary, is that it, as a production and as the genre, I have a lot to say about that, but like, is that usually you get the full explanation of how you got pulled into, like, I understand David's reasons, right? And
I don't. But I don't know that I need to. Because he says, you know, I thought that this guy was really edgy and cool because he also was condemning Christians. But like, how did he go from you know, I'm riding the corporate superhighway to this I really find compelling? I don't know why he found it compelling.
Well, I mean, I think at least I felt like he articulated his full understanding of how he got. Like, I feel like he was very open about why he found it attractive, why he got into it, in a way that it was not, comparatively, we get very little of that detail.
That's
right?
true. Yeah,
and I feel like that detail's there. My sense was he was just holding back, and I'm curious about what he's like. And I don't know. I'll never know. But
well, talk to me about that. Okay, so you have things to say. You said about like production and what's
so first thing. Okay, so the first thing I think, to your point, is do you think that the claim that starts at the beginning of the series, because they introduce you to Andrea Yates in the story, leaving out a lot of details on purpose, so that you're like, why would this happen, right? Which I totally would buy, you know. And then you get Moses saying, I actually knew why, right?
Yeah.
But then, so the sense is that nobody really knows why she did this.
Yeah.
Right? No one knows, and I know because it's actually about this Warnke guy and this religious belief system.
Yeah.
But then in episode 3, we get all of this news coverage of Warnke coming out of the first trial, and the reason she is found not guilty for reasons of insanity in the second trial is because they were more explicit about Warnke and all of that. So and then there's news coverage about how she got off, how she was the ruling that also referenced Warnke, and Warnke's on Larry, like, right? So the idea that we don't it seems in that third part that Warnke and the belief system behind this, and she killed them to save them, was actually part of this, very much part of the story,
or at least we had access to it.
And so, to what extent was the beginning claim that we don't really know why just a reason to itself part of a storytelling technique, one could say charitably, or an excuse to make the documentary, because it actually didn't tell us anything new, because by episode 3 we can see that it was already in the news.
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think in the second trial, I mean, definitely Warnke came up in the trials for sure, but I think it was framed, at least what we hear from her defense attorney, is like, this was something that fed her psychosis. The psychosis and, like, you know, paranoid delusions and hallucinations and such, like, that was a thing that existed. This was just fuel to that fire.
Yes.
But we can't hold that accountable because anything can be fuel to that fire.
Yes.
I think that, at least my reading of what Moses Storm's initial, kind of standpoint is that we had access to this information, but it was something that we left alone. And it was something that we weren't going to dig into too deeply because it scratches at our own, like, you know, societal beliefs about family and God and piety and whatever. He doesn't go into any of that. He just says that, like, yeah, I think it was something that, like, we knew about this dude, but we left it alone. And he wants to give more context so that we can take it more seriously. That all said, for sure, like, cults, back to our own initial standpoint of, like, why we even have this podcast, cult documentaries are having a moment.
Yes.
And this discourse is being fueled right now. And so we will take more seriously and give more attention to rhetoric about cults and what their influence on human behavior is now than we did in the early aughts, arguably.
Yeah.
And so
I wonder, I don't remember. They do use the word cult in some of this. I'd be curious to see during the second trial in the news coverage how much the word cult showed up.
Yeah.
And how much it was just preacher.
Yeah.
Right?
Belief,
like,
whatever.
To what extent is the cult behind the killer of the title a redescribing of a thing and not in the original?
100%.
Not to.
That's the question that I find interesting. Like, there is so much tragedy and there's so much just despair and so much just failure on so many different parts of structures that should support women having children about this story. That's its own whole thing. What I find interesting in our capacity as scholars who think about these media stories is what it is about the idea of a cult animating this woman's behavior that we find needful now.
Yes.
In 2026, or was it made in 2025?
No, it was released
in 2026.
It was
released just recently. So
number 3 on HBO Max for the week.
So what is it about? Like, so in part, it's just, here's this, like, wild true crime story that is sensational in all of these ways, and so people like it's that kind of media clickbait sort of thing. Sure. But that in relation to the kind of attention that we seem societally to be giving cults, or that the function of that term for us right now in relation to this is what I find interesting to explore. And what is it that we think that we are getting out of that kind of designation?
And this is a good segue to my next. So and I think in this case, for a long time, the story was like there's a lot of conversations about evil and like where one wants to locate the evil here. And I think in some ways, Moses Storm and the larger documentary's argument is
Michael Monarchy.
Yes. Yeah. Is evil was insofar as evil's having this almost unexplainable quality to it in the way it's talked about. So it was in Andrea Yates's Insanity. That was evil, by which we mean we don't have a solid explanation, right? We can talk about mental health. Like there are explanations, but it was left on her.
The media was totally happy at the time to just say, yes, she is evil.
She was an insane mother. She is evil incarnate.
How could her husband defend her? All of
and
that.
So,
yeah.
And then, so evil and insanity are kind of moving, or two sides of the same coin there. And what this documentary says is it just sort of shifts it, right? So we don't know why we, meaning the public in general in 2001 or 2005, doesn't know why this woman would do this. The explanation is evil, insanity, move on. we don't ever actually get a real explanation. The documentary says, no, here's the explanation as to why she did this. She did it to save them, and this makes total rational sense. We can make it's making this strange familiar in a certain way, 100%. Right? But what it then does is lodge all of the evil in Warnke.
Yeah.
And I finished the documentary, and I was like, okay, Michael Warnke had there were 3 people we hear from, maybe 4 or 5. You had the other 2 at the end that kind of pop up. And then there's this guy, Richard, that is mentioned by David. Somebody makes a website that has like 60 people reach out to him.
Right.
So Warnke is not getting rich off this.
Right.
Right. He's not really benefiting in a way that, like, if you look at all the people we want to compare it to, like I was thinking about like Twin Flames, but Twin Flames have made a shit ton of money. You know?
Yeah. No, he never made a company out of it.
Right. This isn't NXIVM. This isn't.
No, he was on college campuses with posters.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't get. I was like, well, why is he doing this then? Like, what's the point for Warnke? And I don't think there's an answer. Like, I don't know I don't have enough data.
What if the answer is like he believes this and he takes his beliefs seriously? Like, that's what
that might be true.
No, for sure. I
don't have enough evidence of that when I'm only hearing the tapes.
Yeah, but I don't like that. To me, is what someone's motives are is something that I guess I never feel like I'm going to have access to those enough to satisfy me in any kind of way.
But it leaves Warnke now, instead of insanity and evil, it's cult and evil. Well, and the cult just absolves us of ever trying to understand whence a Warnke comes from.
Yes. Well, yes. You know
what I'm saying? Like,
yes, that makes sense to me, and I agree with that. I think, like, you know, the thing that I always it's that Hannah Arendt banality of evil, like, idea of just like, what if what we're calling evil is a dude taking his beliefs seriously, or for Eichmann, for her, you know, like this is a dude doing his job. Like, what is the structural apparatus that makes a person feel like this is the logical relationship that they should have to their job or to their beliefs or to their,
and
like,
we get that for Andrea
Michael
Yates.
Warnke is just hanging out with Tuesday. Like, he's just doing his job.
But we get that for Andrea Yates. Like, that's the whole point, is like, here is the system within which this actually made sense. Right. And here are the mental health issues that also inflect that. Here are.
I don't actually think that we did enough. I don't think that the documentary did nearly enough of what it could have in relation to that. Actually.
Well, yeah, there's a whole story of, like, not just mental health, but women's health in general, and all those systems that but at least there's something there, right? Yeah. So it just, I guess what I think of is, like, insofar as evil is a way we talk about unknowns, icky unknowns, then we've gained a better understanding of Andrea Yates, and now we could maybe, you know, the audience can not see her as just evil, and I think that's helpful. But we are left we've just shifted it down a peg. So you're right, and I'm like, I have so many questions about, you know, how did this get, like, how does Michael Warnke end up the Michael Warnke that shows up here?
Yeah,
right?
And I mean, like,
and not that we're gonna have definitive answers.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean,
but we're okay leaving it there because that's the cult.
Yeah, and it's like, that's the what we don't allow ourselves to take serious stock of is the prospect of, what if this is just a person taking their beliefs seriously? Because what we want to think is that is a really good thing. Someone who takes their beliefs seriously is someone who's pious and committed and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, we want to maintain our relationships to certain kinds of, you know, just certain ethos, like that would say there's a right way to do belief, and that there's a right way to, and, you know, I think that is a level of nuance that is a much more difficult kind of water to swim in and wade into. And I don't think that that's Moses Storm's job. I don't think it's David Delilah. Like, again, like people who grew up in these things and are looking to make meaning, like they deserve their journeys. I think that in terms of the ways that we produce stories about them and put them out into the world for public consumption of people who have nothing to do with these stories, except in our what we have to do with these stories is our, as ever for me, complicity in the structures that we want to keep up and running without thinking about the implications thereof. You know, how long does an insurance company allow someone to get mental health care? How long does, you know, postpartum depression get? Like, what kind of treatment does it get? And how seriously do we take it? And what is, you know, like, what
also, like a woman who has, like you said, that many kids in that few years, raising them in an RV.
No, but she's in a house with the kids.
They were in an RV before that with 4 of them.
Yes, they did actually have an RV.
Like, there's a lot here about like how shitty her situation was in so many ways.
Just spatially,
that just like spatially, energy level, like mental health, physical health, all
especially
of it.
when it's the mother's job.
And if I guess frankly, like, and maybe this is just my own. Maybe I'm projecting or importing my own, my own baggage. But like, if you know that, if so many of Rusty's answers were like, I don't know, like, that like, I'm not feeling like he's super. I am inferring from that she's doing a lot of all of this on her own. In those circumstances. To me, the fact that the difference between the first trial and the second trial was, well, we have this theological explanation.
I don't think that was not the difference. The difference was this person gave false testimony, and we're going to lean in a little bit more directly to issues of mental health deterioration and insanity defense. Like, they honed that, but it wasn't. That was not the first time. That was not like a entree of Warnke.
My point is, like, a jury. They had part of that honing in was emphasizing things like the perilous times and all that, right? And to make the jury understand. My point is, there was enough evidence of mental, physical, emotional distress that might lead to psychosis, keeping all of the Warnke stuff out in the first trial. But it took, like, there's something about a cult, even if that's the word, or just religious beliefs, faith-based illusions that somehow was more convincing. And there's lots of variables, so it wasn't the same jury. But from the foreman, who I think was one of the most interesting parts of the documentary, was hearing from him. It was literally like this document, the perilous times, that really put them over the top.
Here's why I found the foreman interesting, though, and this is part of the So that foreman. The way that they got everybody on the same page, and the way that they like got that final juror to, you know, who was a holdout, to say, like, we've got to, you know, like, use this, we've got to take this insanity defense seriously, is that they actually put into their own, like, language and their own, like, structure of argumentation, God will judge the rest. So, like, whatever, man. You're still, it's so then it becomes, okay, so what we're actually saying is there's a right way to do, it's the good, bad religion rubric yet again of, like, we want to be able to hold on to, and fair enough, right? Like, people get to believe what they believe. Like, what? None of my business. But that idea of, we want to be able to put into this formal legal space God's judgment, but we don't want it to show up in this way.
Yes.
Is what I find interesting about this whole. Well, it's not the only thing, but
when you couple that with, yes.
So 100%. How to keep protecting that,
and they did a moment of silence.
Well,
for each kid.
100. I love it. Like, sure, do it.
But my point is like, when you put all this together, there's this really interesting thing here that is not highlighted by the documentary, but I think illustrated by it, of there are all these like we just need somewhere to put the stuff we can't understand or figure out.
Sure.
And if we can put it not on Andrea Yates, but on Warnke, then we can find her not guilty by reason of insanity. And as a jury, if we can put it on the God's judgment, right? So these, and I don't think rhetorical is the right term because it feels bigger than just that, but it's like, so what the cult behind the killer does is it just gives us if we would like to, if we are in a time now, maybe we are, I don't know, but at least a number of people don't want to just blame this mom. And so we can now move the I don't understand, whatever you want to call it, the evil, whatever, to the cult, or God's judgment. And I think that's an interesting way to think about what things we call religion, stuff we talk about, belief, words like faith, cult, how all of these words, and I'm not the first person to say this, but like this is an interesting example of like how those function for us.
Sure.
Not in a way that is about a kind of collective, almost scapegoating, a collective place to put the stuff we don't get. And depending on where we put it, has real effects about who goes to prison. Or, I mean, she could have gotten the death. Like, it was very close to her getting the death penalty for this.
Yeah. And it's like, we may not want to blame the mother in the same way, or like attach that kind of like shame or guilt to like mental illness or whatever. But we do absolutely still in our discussions of these media, and I think one of the reasons that they're so successful as media is that I think we are still more than happy. We are enthusiastically invested in identifying what this person is up to and what this person's motivations are and what this character is doing and what that person, it is the caricatures of which Real Housewife is the one that's like this and that, and she shouldn't have done this and that. We want to always continue to reserve the right to cast a kind of judgment on what someone's up to and why, and what they're really thinking and what they're not. And that's where I think it's I don't know. It's like, yeah. So I think that yes, where we put that blame is a moving target.
Yeah.
But we want to, keep doing that for sure.
We'll go to Cool for just a second. I just want to say, so two quick things.
Yeah.
One, I thought too about this one. We have reached the self-aware, self-referential cult documentary.
Okay.
Because in episode 2.
Oh yeah.
Right, there's this line where Moses Storm says, like, I'm jealous of when I watch cult documentaries, they're episode 2, because in episode 2, they show clips from Wild Wild Country of like everybody's happy and they've all found this mission, and we didn't even get that. Yeah. Like, and so
it was always isolated. There was not a community to attach into.
We have someone who's involved in the production.
Yeah.
Narrating their own experience back to themselves through the genre of the cult documentary in a cult documentary in which its episode 2 is actually about not the group coming together, but the various isolated individuals and how isolated and impressed they were.
It was
right?
Great. Yeah.
And so I do think this is really important because within this sort of genre that's been sketched out in the last 10 years, because I think this is one of the ones that is really intentionally sort of stepping into this world with this story, and in that way is making the Andrea Yates story a cult story, right? And I thought that's where I think that question of they say cult like following, and they really hit that hard in the documentary, but is that the majority? Like, the creation not just of a cult documentary, but of this as
that makes sense.
Cult story.
There is a thing that exists that now the story can finally get plugged into in a way that feels helpful. And so,
because when we've had these going back and telling a story, it's usually been about things that got called a cult at a time. Like Synanon was called a cult at a time. You may not have heard about it a lot. Jonestown, right? Yeah. And so now I'm like, what other stories are going to be revisited or dug back up and retold as cult documentary stories.
Yeah, it'll be interesting too to see like what the shelf life for this is too, because language is its own moving target and it's always evolving and shifting. And so anyway,
also, the same two directors, Julian Hobbs and Eli Hakami, also directed the next one we're doing, The Cult of the Real Housewife. And they both came out. One is
interesting
Discovery, and I don't know what the other one is.
I don't know, but they're both on Max. Yeah,
and they're like 3 and 4 or 2 and 3 right now in the rankings of views on Max. So this is now, and I looked at their whole IMDb, and this is their first 2 kind of this sort. So I think that's interesting to think about the ways these came out and that came out at the same time. I don't know.
You got a takeaway?
I mean, I think the stuff that we talked about, these stories for me about cults, I think again, they are about these collective social anxieties, whether it's parenting, I think about sex with the various the documentaries about, Twin Flames and, what was it? One Taste, relationships, mental health, women's health. Like they're just all these stories are usually about places, like we always talk about these structural breakdowns, these gaps, social gaps. And this documentary is as much about how the state of women's health in our healthcare system, mental health in our healthcare system, as it is what Warnicki's theology of hell.
I mean, if I have a takeaway, this is a really sad story, and I hope that Andrea Yates is getting the help that she needs.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
what's your cult favorite?
I know that you do not like scary movies. So maybe this isn't for you, but The Devil's Bath is a film from 2024. So it's recent, directed by Severin Fiala and Veronica Franz. It deserves a rewatch. I need to watch it again. I saw it once at a theater festival, in a film festival in Birmingham. I loved it. I thought it was so beautiful and so harrowing and so like legit scary. And so I thought it like worked on all sorts of levels as a horror movie. But it's based on a book called Suicide by Proxy in Early Modern Germany, Crime, Sin, and Salvation by Kathy Stewart, as well as a couple of like criminal trial records from the 18th century. Here's what have you heard about this phrase?
No.
Suicide by proxy. This is just like, I'm totally like cribbing this from a Wikipedia. So that I don't have to like try to explain it myself. But it's basically a crime that like, especially during the 17th and 18th centuries in like Central Europe and Scandinavia too. But like, so they found these examples of where like suicidal people, which, and this is part of the film, that's never a thing in a vacuum. That always has a broader structure. And so this is to do with like this young woman and her new marriage and getting into this guy's family and her never really fitting in and like whatever. So suicidal people feared going to hell, right? Because you can't kill yourself and go to heaven. So they...
According to the church at the time,
Yeah. So what they would do is commit a capital crime, murder.
Okay.
And then immediately turn themselves in.
Yeah.
And say, like Andrea Yates did, like, I killed someone, you need to execute me or whatever. Like, I need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
When they're on trial and when they're like about to get executed, they get to see a priest and they get to confess and they get to get communion and they get to, like be absolved, which allows them to die and still achieve salvation. And in the specific cases that the film is based on, like this was predominantly the suicide by proxy was predominantly happening among women. And in the cases that the film is based on, it's women killing children.
Wow.
Because obviously the babies are innocent. And so they're not going to kill
because
a
they were
person.
talking about Catholic Europe at the time.
Yes.
The baby's been, as soon as
they're
the baby's,
not going to send anybody else to hell.
Right.
This is a victimless
as an infant, so they're good. Yeah.
So, I mean, just totally harrowing context and story, and it's so sad in so many ways, and there's so much like sorrow and despair, but also like horror done well, but also based on these like actual archives that are really, really, really fascinating, that tell you about a bigger context that, you know, mental health is never its own like vacuous phenomenon. So,
wow.
What's yours?
I did almost put a horror movie on my syllabus for my class this semester, but it was too long to fit.
Oh, man.
It was Hereditary because it's in the book.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's in the book we're using. But I decided no, I don't watch that. This tends to happen to me. It'll be like a new year, and I then discover all of these albums and movies and shows I didn't watch last year.
Oh, sure.
So I've been really enjoying Hayley Williams' 2025 album, Ego Death at a Bachelorette Party, which is an excellent name. I mean, it's just, ever since Paramore, Hayley Williams has been an amazing part of my life. And the album is, it is cool to have people who make music when they're younger and you're younger that you enjoy. And then they make music as that you're older and they're older that you also enjoy.
100%.
Right. So that was so it's a great album.
Shout out Beth
incredibly
Gibbons.
Smart. What?
I said shout out Beth Gibbons.
Yeah. There's a couple for me, but Hayley Williams is one of them.
I love that for you.
So go check that out. It came out in August last year, but very, very good. So
Summer Sleeper getting new life.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Give us our outro.
What?
So give us our outro.
Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite. I will say next time we are going to do the Cult of the Real Housewife, which is also on HBO Max. This is our breaking in new releases in the new year.
New releases
relatively quickly too.
Well, we had to make up for like literal lost time with, Grizzly Man being a throwback, but
if you average out the release dates, it works out. Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify. You can watch videos of this on YouTube. Leave us a rating and review. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Cult Favorite. Special thanks to the REL Digital Lab and the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama for production assistance. And as always, the views expressed in this episode are our own as experts and researchers in religious studies, do not represent the University of Alabama.
You're making sure to put both pieces of bread on that sandwich.
Okay. Nothing that we've said we've meant in any actionable way. It's all parody. And we'll see y'all in 2 weeks.